That thing is probably hollow. People try all kinds of contraband and fake limbs. You know, standard procedure, old man. We need to be thorough." The cold, dismissive words cut sharply through the already tense atmosphere at the TSA checkpoint. Agent Miller, young and fresh in his uniform, carried an air of self-importance far beyond his experience. He gestured impatiently at Elias Thorne's left leg. Elias's face, marked by the quiet lines earned from a life far richer and tougher than Miller could imagine, simply nodded. His gaze was steady. He was an old soldier, though no one there would realize it. Clad in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, his silver hair neatly combed yet thinning, Elias looked like any tired traveler, perhaps a grandfather, en route to visit family. Not a man who once commanded respect from warriors and stared death in the face. The indignity of the moment pressed heavily on him, a familiar burden in a world that often forgot too easily. This moment, this casual stripping of dignity, was an unasked-for battle, but one he would endure with the same quiet fortitude that had carried him through hellfire and back. If you believe true honor lies not in outward appearance, but in the untold stories of sacrifice, comment respect below. Elias Thorne had learned long ago that the loudest voices seldom held the most wisdom, nor did the sharpest uniforms always signify the deepest character. His current situation was proof of a life lived fully, yet modestly, in its later years. After decades of service, a chapter he rarely discussed, cloaked in the fog of duty and deployments to remote, dangerous parts of the world, he now led a quiet life in a small town. He tended a small garden, read voraciously, and occasionally traveled to visit his grandchildren. The very reason he found himself now in this bustling airport terminal, amid the clatter of rolling suitcases and strained public announcements, his prosthetic leg, a marvel of modern engineering, lay beneath his worn denim as a silent companion, a reminder of a sacrifice made in a place whose name now faded to a whisper in history books. It wasn't a badge of honor he displayed, but a part of himself he had accepted and integrated. Today, however, it had become a focus of suspicion, a crude curiosity for Agent Miller. The TSA line was, as always, a study in controlled chaos, a river of humanity flowing toward metal detectors and X-ray machines, each person carrying their own anxieties and urgencies. Elias, patient by nature and by training, had waited his turn, observing harried families, impatient business travelers, and the low hum of stress permeating the place. He placed his single, battered carry-on in a gray bin, removed his belt and shoes as instructed, his movements economical and unhurried. He expected the usual polite inquiry about his leg, perhaps a quick, discreet swab for explosives. He did not expect hostility. He did not expect accusation. Agent Miller, however, seemed to be following a different script. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside," Miller said, his voice carrying a forced edge of authority that felt overly zealous. He directed Elias toward a sterile, brightly lit secondary screening area, a small exposed alcove offering little privacy from the curious or impatient eyes of other passengers. Elias complied without a word, his expression unreadable. "This prosthetic," Miller continued, tapping it with a pen, the dull thud against the advanced composite material echoing in the tense space. "We need to examine it more closely. It's a common concealment method." Elias met his gaze calmly. "It's a medical device, son. I have documentation." He reached for his jacket pocket, where a worn leather wallet held his VA card and a letter from his doctor. Miller waved a dismissive hand. "Documentation can be forged. We see it all the time." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. A few nearby passengers glanced over, their expressions a mix of mild curiosity and a desire to avoid involvement. An older woman winced slightly, then quickly looked away. Elias felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not anger, but profound weariness. He had faced enemy interrogators with more courtesy than this. "What exactly do you need to do?" Elias asked, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the internal storm. He knew the regulations. He knew his rights. He also knew arguing with a petty tyrant in a moment of perceived power was often a futile exercise. He just wanted to get to his flight to see his granddaughter's school play, that was all. Miller smirked, a small unpleasant twist of his mouth. "We need to ensure it's not modified. You'd be surprised what we find. We might need you to remove it." The suggestion came casually, as if discussing a piece of luggage instead of an integral part of a man's body. A constant reminder of sacrifice minutes stretched, each loaded with a growing sense of injustice. Miller seemed to relish the attention, his posture straightening as he continued his intrusive questioning, his voice growing louder and more performative. "So, where did you get this thing? Looks pretty fancy for an old-timer," he sneered, circling Elias slowly. The implication was clear. How could someone dressed simply like him afford such advanced technology? Elias ignored the jab. "It was provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs," he said calmly, eyes fixed on a point just past Miller's shoulder. The old soldier knew the game. Maintain composure. Give only what is necessary. Do not escalate. But Miller was intent on escalation. "The VA, huh? They hand these out like candy, I hear. Still doesn't mean it hasn't been tampered with since." He leaned closer. "You seem awfully calm, old man. Got something to hide?" A family with young children hurried past, escorted by a more professional-looking TSA agent who cast uneasy glances toward Miller and Elias. Tension thickened, an uncomfortable blanket smothering the area. Elias could feel the stares of other travelers, some sympathetic, most just eager to move past the holdup. 6 long minutes. 6 minutes of Miller's probing questions, his thinly veiled accusations and demeaning tone. Elias spoke only when necessary, his answers brief and to the point. He patiently explained that the prosthetic was custom-fitted, that removing it in public was not only undignified, but practically difficult without proper assistance and privacy. Miller scoffed. "If it's a legitimate medical device, you should have no problem showing us. Unless, of course, it's not so legitimate." The word fake had been implied before, but now it was almost spoken aloud. Elias closed his eyes for a brief moment, a silent prayer for patience and strength. He thought of the men he'd served with, men who had lost far more than a limb, men who had given everything. What would they think of this petty humiliation in a country they had sworn to protect? Weariness began to give way to a cold, hard anger, an emotion he had learned to control and channel, but one still residing deep within. He was a man of immense control, but even the strongest steel can be stressed to its limit. The trigger wasn't. A single word, but the culmination of relentless, grinding disrespect. Miller, frustrated by Elias's stoic composure and perhaps emboldened by the lack of senior intervention, finally overplayed his hand. "Look, Grandpa," he spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Either you remove that device right now for a full visual inspection, or we will have to detain you for obstructing a security screening. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." He gestured vaguely toward a stark, windowless room behind the screening area. The threat was unmistakable. At that moment, a quiet observer, a woman in a crisp business suit who had been watching the exchange with growing dismay from a nearby gates waiting area, discreetly made a phone call. She recognized something. In Elias's demeanor, a subtle dignity that Miller's bullying failed to erase. Though she didn't know who he was, she recognized injustice when she saw it. She spoke softly into her phone, her words urgent yet measured, describing the scene, the agent's badge number, and the elderly man with the prosthetic. Meanwhile, Elias took a slow, deliberate breath. He looked directly at Miller, not with anger, but with a profound sadness. "Young man," he began, his voice quiet yet resonating with unexpected authority, There are protocols for screening individuals with medical prosthetics, protocols designed to ensure both security and dignity. You are not following them. Before Miller could reply or unleash another volley of arrogant declarations, the airport's public address system cut through the tension with a distinct crackle. The usual drone of boarding calls and gate changes abruptly ceased. A new voice filled the terminal, deep, resonant, and utterly authoritative. "Attention all TSA personnel at Checkpoint Bravo. This is General Marcus Davies. Stand down, all secondary. Screening procedures at your location. I repeat, stand down, all secondary screening. Supervisor for Checkpoint Bravo, report to the central screening station immediately." The effect was instantaneous. Agent Miller froze, mouth slightly agape, the smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by bewildered apprehension. Other TSA agents at Checkpoint Bravo stopped what they were doing, exchanging confused and nervous glances. Passengers, sensing a significant shift in atmosphere, fell silent, their conversations dwindling. The name General Marcus Davies clearly carried weight. Elias Thorne, however, showed no outward surprise. He simply stood, waiting. Moments later, striding purposefully through the now parted sea of travelers, came a figure of undeniable presence. General Marcus Davies was a man in his late 50s, his uniform immaculate, his bearing that of someone accustomed to command and heavy responsibility. His sharp, intelligent eyes swept the scene, taking in Miller's flustered state, the hesitant agents, and finally resting on Elias Thorne. As General Davies approached, his gaze fixed on Elias. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Surprise. Then dawning recognition, followed by profound respect radiating outward. He stopped directly in front of Elias, ignoring Miller completely. For a moment, the entire checkpoint seemed to hold its breath. "Alias," General Davies said, his voice softer now but still carrying the full weight of his rank. "Alias Thorne, is that really you?" Elias offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Marcus," he acknowledged quietly. A lifetime of shared experiences and unspoken understanding seemed to pass between them in that single exchange. Davies then turned his steely gaze upon Agent Miller, whose face had grown considerably pale. "Agent," Davies began, his voice dangerously calm, "what is the meaning of the spectacle?" Miller stammered, "Sir, standard procedure, this individual, his prosthetic—" General Davies cut him off with a sharp, decisive gesture. "Standard procedure does not include the public humiliation of any citizen, let alone a man of Sergeant Major Elias Thorne's caliber." He paused, letting his words sink in as his eyes swept over the assembled TSA staff and onlookers. "For those of you who do not know," General Davies announced, his voice ringing with authority and deep pride, "the man your colleague has so thoroughly examined is Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, retired. He is not just a veteran. He is a recipient of the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty during the Battle of Hill 734. The very leg Miller had so callously questioned was lost, saving the lives of 3 members of his platoon, my platoon, under direct enemy fire. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Agent Miller looked as though he might faint, the color completely draining from his face, replaced by a sickly green. Other TSA agents stared first at Elias, then at General Davies, then back at Elias, their expressions a mixture of shock, shame, and dawning respect. The full weight of the general's words settled upon them. This quiet, unassuming old man, who had endured Miller's condescension with stoic patience, was a national hero, a man whose bravery was the stuff of legend. "General," Davies continued, his voice resonating with controlled fury and profound disappointment, primarily aimed at Miller, but offering a broader lesson for all present. "Sergeant Major Thorne has given more to this country than you can possibly comprehend, Agent. He has endured trials you cannot imagine, and he did so to protect the very freedoms you so casually abuse in the name of security." Davies stepped closer to Miller, who visibly flinched. Your behavior has been unprofessional, disrespectful, and a disgrace to the uniform you wear. A uniform that stands for protecting citizens, not persecuting them. The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet intensity of his words was more damning than any tirade. He then turned back to Elias, his demeanor softening instantly. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice filled with warmth and deep respect, "on behalf of a grateful nation, and as your former commanding officer, I apologize profusely. You should never have been subjected to this." He executed a flawless, crisp salute, not the salute of a general to a subordinate, but that of one warrior to another, a mark of profound esteem. Elias Thorne, his composure finally showing the faintest crack of emotion in the slight glistening of his eyes, returned a shadow of his old, precise salute. The sight of the decorated general saluting the humbly dressed veteran silenced any remaining murmurs in the terminal. The vindication was absolute, the humiliation of the accuser complete. Miller stood frozen, his career likely flashing before his eyes. The checkpoint supervisor, who had rushed over pale and sweating, began stammering apologies to both the general and Elias. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of hushed, respectful activity. General Davies personally escorted Elias Thorne through the remainder of the security process, which was now handled with an almost reverential deference by a senior TSA supervisor. Agent Miller was quietly but firmly relieved of his duties at the checkpoint and led away by the supervisor, his face a mask of dazed shame. The official inquiry into his conduct would begin immediately. General Davies assured Elias that not only would Miller face disciplinary action, including mandatory retraining with a focus on interacting with veterans and individuals with disabilities, but this incident would also prompt a review of TSA training protocols agency-wide. "We can't have this happening, Elias," Davies said, his voice heavy with concern as they walked toward Elias's departure gate. "The men and women who serve, who sacrifice, they deserve nothing less than our utmost respect and understanding, especially from those in positions of authority." Elias, typically a man of few words, simply nodded, a quiet gratitude shining in his eyes. The raw anger he had felt earlier had dissipated, replaced by weary relief and a touch of sadness that such an intervention had been necessary. As they reached the gate, a few passengers who had witnessed the earlier scene approached tentatively. An elderly woman, tears in her eyes, gently touched Elias's arm. "Thank you for your service, sir," she whispered. A businessman, looking grim, added, "We were sorry you had to go through that." Elias offered them a small, tired smile. The general clapped him warmly on the shoulder. "Travel safely, Sergeant Major. It was an honor to see you again, even under these circumstances." Their handshake was firm, a bond forged in hardship decades. Ego, now unexpectedly reaffirmed in the sterile environment of an airport terminal. The system had failed for a moment, but individuals, the observant woman who made the call, the general who acted decisively, ensured that dignity and honor prevailed. Elias Thorne's flight was not delayed, but the atmosphere in that section of the terminal had irrevocably changed. The earlier tension and frustration gave way to somber reflection among those who had witnessed the drama. Elias Thorne, now comfortably seated by a window, watched the ground crew preparing his plane. The ordeal at security was already receding, though the memory of General Davies's intervention brought a faint, rare smile to his lips. Agent Miller was facing a thorough investigation. The TSA supervisor had personally assured General Davies that comprehensive retraining programs focusing on sensitivity, veteran affairs, and proper screening protocols for individuals with prosthetics and disabilities would be immediately implemented and reinforced at that airport, with recommendations for nationwide adoption. The core lesson of the day resonated deeply. True worth is not dictated by outward appearances. The quietest individuals often carry the most profound stories of courage and sacrifice. We must never judge a book by its cover. Heroes walk among us every day, unassuming and unrecognized, their valor hidden beneath ordinary clothes, their sacrifices etched not on their sleeves, but in their souls. The image that lingered was of General Davies standing ramrod straight, saluting Sergeant Major Thorne, a 4-star general paying homage to a retired enlisted man, a powerful visual testament to the fact that true rank is earned through character and sacrifice, not just stars on a shoulder. Their quiet conversation, the understanding flowing between two men who had shared the crucible of combat, spoke volumes, more than any shouted command or public decree. Let this story remind us to always lead with respect, to look deeper, and to honor those who have given so much. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more stories that uplift the human spirit and champion the values of dignity and recognition. Type honor in the comments if you stand with Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, and believe every individual, especially our veterans, deserves to be treated with the highest respect.